you seen Star Wars?
I've said before that my most anticipated Star Wars project right now that's coming out in the next, let's say, 5 years, it's likely the Acolyte series. That's going to be headed by Leslye Headland. She is the showrunner for this. And honestly, when they first announced that she was doing her own Star Wars series, I was a little nervous. I have no idea who this woman is. I don't know any of the projects that she's worked on, and I just didn't see anything that made me go, okay, she can showrun her own Star Wars story. But then I found out that the show she's going to be in charge of is The Acolyte, which 50 years before The Phantom Menace is at the end of the High Republic, and it seemingly follows a young Sith acolyte. It's been said that it's going to be female-centric or female-led. I think it's the more proper term is female-led. I actually don't think it's going to be a series only about females. And in this recent interview with the AV Club, she kind of talks more about Star Wars than she ever has, at least in this kind of scenario, because we're actually curious on how she's going to approach this series. And she goes on to talk about her relationship with Star Wars, and like many of us, it's spanned for a very long time. She said that she read Timothy Zahn's Heir to the Empire, and when she was a teenager, Star Wars was still a really big deal for her, even during, those dark days when we weren't getting any new movies. So she's been a fan for some time, and now she's going to be in charge of her own Star Wars story, her entirely own Star Wars show that is very unique in terms of what we're exploring in the timeline. And the question that we have as an audience, as Star Wars fans who are very diehard, we keep up to date with the news, we speculate on what's going to happen next, the question is, can we trust Leslye Headland? Do we think that she is going to do a good job by this show? Is she going to do her due diligence for Star Wars and really deliver on a great product? And the question can only be answered when the show comes out, but we can give some hints on what we can expect from her interviews. And in this, she did talk about how that she felt it was important to find writers that didn't think the same way she did, and even found a writer who has never seen Star Wars and is working on this show. Now, that sounds a little bit off-putting, naturally, because you're like, okay, well, I want them to know what Star Wars is, but at the same time, it makes sense to go, hey, why don't we look at this from an outside perspective? Does this story element work because it is in Star Wars, or does this story element work despite it being in Star Wars? So let's take a look at what she actually said in an interview. The first thing she said was, first of all, I really wanted people that were different than me. I certainly didn't want a room full of people that were just agreeing with me vehemently. Not ideologically, but artistically. People that had different writing styles or were interested in different things, all kinds of stuff. Mostly, what I looked for were people that I feel could execute a great script, number one. And then in the job interview, really just talking to people who had different life experiences than I did and had different connections to Star Wars than I did. And then she also said, what I also learned about hiring my room is that everyone's fandom was very different. No one had the same experience with Star Wars. There were people like myself who were later in life Dave Filoni acolytes. I literally had one writer that was like, I have never seen any of them. I've never seen any Star Wars media. And she's texting me before we start the room. She's like, Luke and Leia are brother and sister. What the... And it was so great because I would really love to know from someone who is not fully immersed in the fandom, what do you think about the pitch we just made? And so I like what she has to say about having multiple writers. It doesn't sound like she is going to be the, not only showrunner, but she's going to be the sole writer, the sole director of the series. She's bringing in a lot of different minds and even people who haven't really watched Star Wars, clearly. And I think that is a very good way to approach a series that has never been done like this. It's very open-minded, and because we're not dealing with the Skywalker saga, per se, we're not going to deal with any characters that I think we truly know. I think you have a little bit of risk allowed in this kind of series. But another thing that she talked about that I wanted to touch a little bit on was her approach to this Star Wars series in a little bit of a political aspect. They asked her about representation of LGBTQ and people of color embracing, Star Wars series and all this stuff that's been happening lately, and she kind of gave the Mark Hamill answer, where she even quotes that. She says, I love the interview that Mark Hamill did, where he said, if Luke is gay to you, then of course he's gay. That's such a strong, beautiful thing for him to say. I mean, I use the example of The Matrix as well. Neo is a character that if you're going through an experience of coming out or transitioning, that is a character that 100% appeals to you, and you completely track that journey in a way. And she kind of goes on to say that when she's making this, she wants you to be able to watch the series and interpret it in your own way. So if you're watching The Acolyte or you're watching Star Wars in general, and you take away Judeo-Christian values from that, you are allowed to do so. Or maybe on the other end, you take away family values from this, or maybe it's about being alone. Maybe you take away a Buddhist kind of mentality towards it. Maybe you could take away LGBTQ representation and a story about coming out like that. She's saying in this that you don't have to have someone standing over your shoulder when you're watching the Star Wars show and telling you, oh, actually, you're interpreting this wrong. It's meant to be portrayed as this. And I really like that because sometimes, at least when it comes to the recent films, it's felt like we've all either unanimously agreed or we completely divisive, and it's a 50-50 on how to interpret the sequel trilogy of what its message actually is. And it seems like in this one it's meant to be open to interpretation. You're supposed to be taking your own story and your own values out of this. So like I said, very hard to do, but very powerful if it can be pulled off. And she goes on to talk about the politics of Star Wars, saying that she's not only following George Lucas's footsteps, but she's trying to bring out the history of film, kind of like how he did with the original trilogy. But this last little part is probably going to get her in a lot of trouble with people in the fandom menace and people who just likely aren't going to give her a chance to make this show good. And a lot of people on Twitter are pointing this stuff out too. She says that she's getting a lot of feedback on social media. She says, but when I do go on social media, the feedback is, don't make Star Wars political. And I'm like, George Lucas made it political. Those are political films. War is by nature political. That's just what's up. And I think that's a fair statement. I think one thing people nowadays don't like about Star Wars being political, and I use quotation marks around that, is we don't want to feel like we're having a certain message shoved down our throats. There's a fine line between what she's talking about of we're watching the Star Wars show and we're interpreting it in our own unique way. Like I said, you can take away Judeo-Christian values from it. You can take away Buddhist values from it. You can take away LGBTQ representation. You can take away these certain elements of the story if it is open to interpretation like that. But if it's political in the sense that it's preaching a certain political ideology, that's where some people will likely get upset, and I feel like we saw that a little bit with the sequel trilogy. A lot of people, and I'm not going to say myself included because I've kind of grown out of this mentality, but a lot of people at the time felt like it was preaching anti-capitalism ideology, and that wasn't really that open for interpretation. Now, whether that belief is wrong or that criticism of the sequel trilogy is right or wrong is going to be a debate we have forever, but I understand what she's saying when it comes to approaching Star Wars, that it is always inherently going to have some political backstory to it. But we'll see what happens with the series. The question, of course, at the beginning of this was, should we trust her? Truth be told, my trust for this woman has gone up every single time I've heard her talk about her series. And that's really weird for me to say because if you guys go back to a year ago when we were told about her series, when we had the announcement, I have been very skeptical on her as a person and her as a showrunner because I've never seen any of her work. I've heard Russian Doll is really good, but I've never seen it. I don't really know much about her. And when I heard that it was going to be female-centric, it was like, okay, well, why is like the pitch for this series like that already if we don't even really know what the story is going to be about? But as she talks about that report, she's like kind of annoyed with the way they worded it, where she's like, no, it's a female-led series. It sounds like we're going to have our main character be a female, which is a lot different than having a female-centric story, if that makes sense. So the more she's talked about this series, the more she's talked about her approach to Star Wars, the more respect I have had for this woman, and my anticipation for it has gone up. I mean, the fact that it's called The Acolyte, the fact that it's completely different than almost any Star Wars project we've ever seen, and we've even heard reports in the past month or so that Darth Revan is going to have a small cameo in it. He's not going to be like a character in it, but he will be in a holocron in the show and have like some references to him. That's really cool to me. It sounds like this show is about a young Sith acolyte, a young Sith apprentice who is traveling the galaxy, finding Sith artifacts and going from location to location. And that sounds really intriguing to me because we're exploring more about the Sith, and we're exploring a very unique timeline in the Star Wars universe. So, do I trust Leslye Headland? At the moment, I do. I think she's making all the right approaches to this. She's bringing in multiple people to write the series, people who have very unique and different perspectives of Star Wars, people who have never even seen Star Wars, because if you have a story that works without being in the Star Wars universe, then it's probably going to be even better if it's actually put into the Star Wars universe. So I do trust Leslye Headland at this moment. Times may change. I may see a trailer for this Acolyte series and go, that looks awful. But at the moment, she is making a very smart decision in all the things she is saying, and I feel like she's making the right approach to this series. I could be wrong, and I could be interpreting this in the wrong way, but I feel like she's got a good head on her shoulders. And one thing I always respect is when someone is self-aware, and it feels like she is very self-aware about her situation and where she's standing in the Star Wars universe. So tell me your thoughts in the comment section below. What do you guys think about Leslye Headland's interview with the AV Club? Did you like it? Did you not like it? Do you like her approach to the Acolyte series? Or do you think she's approaching this wrong? Tell me your thoughts in the comment section below. Thank you all for watching. If you like this video, please give it a like, comment, or subscribe because it does help out the channel. If you want to become a really big fan of Star Wars Only, you can become an Only fan. How do you do that? All you have to do is press subscribe, hit the bell icon to stay up to date on the latest news in Star Wars. I'm Star Wars Only. I will see you all next time, and may the Force be with you always.